I didn't buy the truck to show off. I bought it to buy love. And what he said after getting behind the wheel made me wish I'd set the thing on fire. That's how the 4th of July started. The year my father taught me that DNA isn't what makes someone your parent, and betrayal doesn't always come with yelling. Sometimes, it's dressed up in pressed khakis and polite applause. I'm Monica Whitmore, 41, and after 2 decades in finance, after clawing my way to a director's seat in a firm that still whispers boys club behind closed doors, I thought a brand new Ford F-150 Platinum would finally make him proud. He always loved those trucks, always talked about them like they were the reward for doing life right. So I handed him the keys. He looked at me, then looked past me, said something about how success must have finally rubbed off. And just like that, I knew I could give everything and still be invisible. But what if he was never mine to impress? We were standing in the driveway of the same house I'd visited since childhood, yet it felt foreign, as if I had walked into someone else's family and forgotten the lines. My mother fluttered around the grill like everything was normal. My brother Scott laughed too loudly with our father's business friends, and my sister Amy gave me her usual look, the one that said, "Don't poke the bear." But I wasn't there to keep the peace anymore. Because in my purse, beneath the lip balm and folded napkin with a wine stain from the drive over, was a sealed envelope. A paternity test, confirming what a recreational DNA kit had suggested and what my gut had whispered my whole life, that Edward Whitmore wasn't my biological father. I hadn't told a soul, not even Amy. Not yet. But I felt it pulsing through me like a heartbeat made of truth. As he lifted his glass later that night, ready to toast the Whitmore legacy, I wondered, what would happen if I tore open the silence right here, right now? Would they believe me? Would he finally look at me, really look at me? Or would I become the villain in a story I never even asked to be part of? He raised his glass and said, "To Scott and Amy, my legacy in action." Then he looked straight through me like I was just a guest at my own family's table. No mention of the truck. No nod to the promotion I'd worked 20 years for. Nothing. The room clapped politely. Forks clinked against plates, and I smiled like it didn't burn. But inside, I was unraveling in silence. I excused myself, walked to the bathroom, and locked the door, not because I needed privacy, but because I needed a minute not to scream. I stared into the mirror, watching my own face search for something. Dignity, maybe. Or permission to stop begging. The envelope was still in my purse. Untouched, heavy as stone. I pulled it out and held it in both hands. There it was, 3 pages that proved I'd spent my whole life trying to impress the wrong man. My hands shook, but not from fear, from clarity. For the first time, I wasn't wondering if I was enough. I was wondering why I'd ever let him decide that for me. Back at the table, Scott was launching into some story about a real estate deal that went sideways, everyone laughing at the punchline before he even finished. Classic. Meanwhile, my father leaned back in his chair, smug as ever, sipping bourbon and nodding along like he was still the general, and we were all just cadets waiting for his approval. That's when I knew this wasn't a family dinner. This was a performance, and I'd been cast in the wrong role my whole life. I walked back in, calm but electric, and sat down just as dessert was being served. My mother reached for my hand under the table like she always did when tension rose, but I didn't squeeze back. Not this time. I laid the envelope next to my plate and said nothing. Just let it sit there like a live wire. And when Dad's voice filled the room again, about grit, tradition, legacy, I didn't hear him. All I heard was my own heartbeat, steady and ready. Because I wasn't the wild card anymore. I was the fuse. And this family was about to learn what happens when the one they ignored stops playing nice. The air outside hit me like a wave, cool, sharp, honest. It smelled like grass clippings, distant barbecue smoke, and the faintest trace of jasmine from my mother's garden, the one she tended like it was a child she actually wanted. I walked toward the driveway on instinct, not strategy, my heels clicking against the stone like punctuation marks to a sentence I'd been trying to end for years. And there it was, the truck, gleaming, powerful, expensive. A gift meant to earn belonging, Now just another reminder that I had never truly belonged. I pressed the unlock button. The headlights blinked once, and that soft mechanical chirp felt louder than anything said at the dinner table. My reflection in the driver's side window startled me, not because of how I looked, but because of how still I seemed. Like something had settled. Something long unsettled. I slid into the seat and shut the door behind me with quiet finality. The leather interior still held that faint new car smell. But I knew I wouldn't keep it. This wasn't my father's truck. It never really was. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Edward at the front door, envelope in hand, mouth opening to speak. But he didn't shout. He didn't run. He just stood there, backlit and stiff, clutching that envelope like it might explode if he let go. Part of me waited just 1 second to see if he would say something. Anything. An apology. A denial. Even a curse. But silence is a language, too. And I'd spent a lifetime being fluent in his. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life, steady and smooth, and as I backed out of the driveway, I didn't look at him again. I looked at the road ahead. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was running. It felt like I was returning. To myself. To truth. The phone buzzed in the console. Amy, probably. Or my mother. Or maybe even Edward. Scrambling for control now that the script had been burned. Because some departures are not escapes. They're arrivals. And some goodbyes don't echo with sorrow. They ring with freedom. I didn't know exactly where I was going. But I knew who I wasn't chasing anymore. And that was more than enough. I made it just past the city limits when the first text came in. Amy. What the hell just happened? A minute later, Mom's name lit up my screen. Then again. And again. I let them pile up in silence, the way my questions had piled up for years without answers. The road ahead was empty, quiet, and for once so was my mind. No more mental gymnastics trying to read Edward's tone. No more wondering if I was too loud, too ambitious, too me. I wasn't running from my family. I was driving straight toward a life they never really welcomed me into anyway. By the time I checked into a small boutique hotel in downtown Denver, the calls had jumped to 17.
Mom. Amy.
Cousins. A couple of "Are you okay?" texts from second-tier relatives who'd probably only remembered I existed because of the scene. But none from Edward.
Not one.
And that, somehow, still managed to sting. I tossed the key card on the dresser and sank into the bed fully clothed, staring up at the ceiling like it might hold answers. The envelope was gone, left in his hands like a mirror I'd forced him to look into. I had no idea what he did after I left. Did he yell?
Deny?
Collapse into one of his leather chairs and drink the rest of his scotch? Did he finally feel the weight of 30 years of dismissal? I doubted it. Edward Whitmore didn't crumble, he calculated. The next morning, I woke to a message from my mother that made my throat tighten. It wasn't an affair. You were from before him. We thought pretending would protect you. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. Attached was a photo. An old college yearbook page. A man circled in red ink, smiling like he didn't know his daughter would grow up thinking someone else's cold silence was love. His name was David Weller.
MIT.
Engineering. And suddenly, the pieces didn't just fit, they clicked. I stared at that photo for a long time, like maybe it could speak back. The ache in my chest wasn't grief. It was recognition. The sense that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been unwanted. I'd just been unseen. And now, for the first time in my life, I was ready to be seen by the right people, even if I had to find them myself. I didn't expect him to respond, but 3 days later, he did. A simple email. No subject line. Just, Monica, I was stunned to read your message. If what you said is true, then I have a daughter I never knew existed. I'll be in Denver next week for a conference. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet. That was it. No drama. No denial. Just calm, cautious honesty. It stopped me in my tracks. After everything, after Edward's lifelong campaign to make me feel like a stranger in my own home, here was a man I'd never met who already sounded more human than the father I'd known my entire life. I reread the message 5 times. Each word felt like stepping into light after years of darkness. He didn't owe me anything. He didn't fake affection or make excuses.
But he saw me.
Or at least, he wanted to. And that alone cracked something wide open in me. I hit reply before I could second guess it. Next week works. Coffee, somewhere quiet. When we finally sat across from each other, at a quiet little cafe near City Park, I was shocked by how familiar he looked. The slope of his nose, the way his brow furrowed when he listened, the nervous tapping of his fingers on the cup. I'd seen all of it before. In the mirror. Engineering, huh? I said with a smile, trying to break the ice. I guess that's where I got the numbers brain. He chuckled, soft and warm. You got more than that, I think. For the first time in my life, a father figure looked at me without sizing me up or measuring me against someone else's standard. He asked questions. He listened. He didn't interrupt or correct. And when I told him about my career, the truck, the reunion, he didn't say you overreacted or give him a chance. He said, you did what you needed to do to protect yourself. I respect that. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the ache. But it began something. Something real. I didn't walk away with a perfect father. I walked away with a beginning. And for someone like me, raised on conditional love and constant comparison, that beginning felt like a revolution. The funny thing is, the world doesn't stop spinning just because your whole life shifts on its axis. Work emails kept coming. Deadlines loomed. My team at the firm needed answers on a portfolio we were restructuring. And somewhere between trauma and healing, I had to pretend like I wasn't rebuilding my entire identity from the ground up. But in a strange way, that rhythm saved me. The meetings, the models, the back and forth about risk percentages and future yields, it grounded me. It reminded me that I wasn't some broken thing floating in the aftermath. I was Monica Whitmore, Director of Strategy. And I hadn't earned that because of Edward or in spite of him. I'd earned it because I refused to break. Then came the envelope. Another one, this time from Edward's lawyer. It was cold, clinical. A request to return the truck belonging to Mr. Whitmore, along with a statement warning me that public dissemination of false paternity claims could result in reputational and legal consequences. I read the letter 3 times before I laughed. Not a wild laugh. Just that low, tired kind, the kind that comes when you realize someone is still trying to control the narrative even after you've burned the script. I forwarded it to my attorney and instructed him to return the truck. Not because I was scared. Not because he deserved it. But because I was done. I wouldn't waste another ounce of energy trying to hold onto anything tied to that man's name. Let him have the leather seats and chrome trim. I had something better, peace. But what struck me most wasn't the threat. It was the silence that followed. Not one message. Not a phone call.
No denial. No explanation.
Just legal distance. And maybe that's all Edward Whitmore was ever capable of offering. Terms. Boundaries. Contracts. Never connection. Meanwhile, David, my biological father, emailed again. This time with a photo of me taped to his desk. I don't want to miss 41 years of stories, he wrote. Tell me one every time we talk. It was simple, human,
Kind.
and for the first time in weeks, I cried. Not from pain, but from relief. Because sometimes the person who shares your blood makes you feel like a stranger. And sometimes, the person who just learned your name makes you feel like home. 6 months later, I found myself standing in front of Amy's kitchen window, slicing apples for her Thanksgiving pie like we used to when we were kids. Only now, the air between us held something new: honesty. The family gathering wasn't at the Whitmore estate this year. Edward had declined the invitation the moment Amy told him I'd be there.
No surprise.
He hadn't spoken a word to me since the lawyer's letter. And strangely, I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of him, the father I used to wish he was. But the man himself? He could keep his silence. I had finally learned to stop interpreting it as mystery and start calling it what it was: absence. Amy handed me the cinnamon and smiled softly. He can't change, you know, she said, not with malice, but with certainty. Not won't, can't. You tore down the narrative he built his entire identity on. And some people just don't survive truth that deep. I nodded, letting that settle. She wasn't wrong. And I didn't need him to change anymore. That chapter was over. But what surprised me was what had begun in its place. A new kind of family. One built not on blood, but on presence. On showing up. On truth. David called me that morning to wish me a happy holiday. He was spending the day with his wife and children, my half-siblings, technically, but he made time for a call. "Save me a slice of pie," he joked, "and tell Amy she's lucky to have you." It was simple, uncomplicated,
Warm.
and I could feel the difference in my bones. Mom called later that afternoon too, her voice steadier now, like she'd put down the performance she'd carried for decades. "I'm proud of you, Monica," she said unprompted. "Not for what you've done, but for who you are, for what you walked away from." I didn't realize I was crying until Amy handed me a napkin. That night, as we sat around her table with mismatched chairs, too many casseroles, and children's laughter echoing down the hallway, I realized something profound. I didn't need to rewrite the past. I just needed to stop letting it write me. Because sometimes, the most radical form of revenge isn't confrontation or fury, it's peace. It's joy. It's building a life so rich and real, it no longer needs anyone's permission to exist. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I woke up to sunlight cutting across my bedroom wall in golden slats, the kind that makes you pause and breathe before the day begins. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for anything. No calls from lawyers. No texts laced with guilt. No stomach knot at the thought of proving myself to someone who'd already decided I didn't count. Just coffee brewing in the kitchen and a quiet sense of arrival. Not at a destination, but at myself. Therapy helped. Not in the dramatic, earth-shattering way I'd imagined, but in slow, steady layers. Each week, I peeled back another belief I'd inherited from a house that preached success, but practiced dismissal. I'd spent years earning things, titles, money, awards, hoping they'd fix a wound that wasn't mine to carry. "You didn't fail him," my therapist said once, scribbling something I couldn't see. "He failed to see you. And that's not the same." I repeated that sentence like a mantra on days when doubt crept in. Because it did, still does sometimes. Healing isn't a straight line. It curves. It circles back. But the difference now? I know I'm not alone. David and I talk every Sunday evening. Nothing grand. Just check-ins. We swap stories, laugh about how we both calculate tips in our heads before the receipt even arrives. He's careful not to overstep, and I'm learning how to receive without flinching. There's no script. No performance.
Just space to be.
And Mom, she's trying in her own way. Last week, she mailed me a photo of me as a toddler sitting in David's lap, long before Edward ever entered the picture. "I thought I lost this," her note read. "Turns out I was just afraid to look." It nearly wrecked me, but I didn't fall apart. I framed it instead. Because here's what I've learned. The family we're born into may shape us, but it doesn't define us. The love we deserve isn't earned through sacrifice or silence. It's offered freely, or it's not love at all. And sometimes, the greatest act of freedom is simply this: refusing to apologize for surviving. I didn't just walk away from Edward Whitmore. I walked into my life. Finally, fully. And this time, no one gets to tell me I don't belong. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring when I caught my reflection in the front window of the community center and did a double take. Not because I looked different, though maybe I did, but because for the first time in years, I saw a woman who looked like she belonged. I was holding a stack of brochures for a financial literacy workshop I designed, something I used to dream about doing back when I was crunching numbers under someone else's name. Someone else's rules. Now it was mine. Whitmore Women's Wealth Project. I kept the name, not for him, but for me. To reclaim it. To rewrite it. Because legacy doesn't just come from bloodlines. It comes from what you build. We just wrapped up our first official class. 10 women from all walks of life, single moms, recent retirees. Women starting over after divorce or illness, sat in a sunlit room with notebooks, calculators, and hope. I'd watch their faces light up as they learned how to budget without shame, how to speak to banks with confidence, how to say no to anyone who made them feel small. In every one of them, I saw pieces of myself. The version of me who once begged for approval, not realizing she was already more than enough. Amy showed up to help, of course. She brought coffee, hugged every guest, and cried quietly during my closing talk. "You didn't just survive, Monica," she said later, her voice thick with emotion. "You turned the wound into something that heals others." I didn't know how to answer that. So I just hugged her and let the moment be what it was, real. Unfiltered.
Ours.
David sent flowers for the launch, sunflowers, my favorite. "For the light you've always been," the card read. And that, too, knocked the air from my lungs. Not because it was poetic, but because it was true. Edward never reached out again. I'd be lying if I said I didn't wonder if he ever thought about me. But these days, that wondering doesn't sting, it drifts. Like smoke. Like something that used to suffocate me, but now simply fades. Because in this season of my life, I no longer need someone to name my worth. I just need space to live it. And I've finally made that space, on my own terms. Thanksgiving came and went, and with it, the last thread I hadn't realized I was still holding. No invitation from Edward. No message. No passive-aggressive comment filtered through a cousin. Just silence. But it didn't ache the way it used to. If anything, it felt like a door quietly clicking shut behind me. Not slammed. Not dramatic. Just final. And in that stillness, I heard something far louder, my own voice, no longer trying to echo someone else's expectations. This year, dinner was at Amy's again. The table was crowded, warm, a little chaotic in the best way. Her youngest spilled cranberry sauce on my blouse, and I didn't even flinch. We all laughed, real laughter. Not the strained kind we used to force in Edward's presence. And as we passed around mashed potatoes and second slices of pie, I realized something profound. This was what family felt like. Not performance. Not perfection. Presence. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, I stepped outside with a blanket and a mug of cider, just needing a moment. The sky was clear, stars sharp as pinpricks. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who shrank herself to fit into someone else's idea of daughter. The one who thought love had to be earned in quiet compliance. I wanted to hug her, to whisper in her ear, "You were never hard to love." They just didn't know how. I checked my phone out of habit and saw a message from David. Just 4 words. "Proud of you, kid." I didn't cry this time. I just smiled because I finally believed it. Healing didn't come in one big wave. It came in small moments like that. In Sunday calls. In women finding power in numbers. In Amy's hand brushing mine as we watched her kids decorate cookies. In choosing not to answer the questions I no longer needed to ask. I didn't get the ending I once begged for. I got something better, a beginning. One built on truth, resilience, and people who show up without being asked. People who love without condition. And if there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. You don't have to keep knocking on doors that never open for you. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build your own house, with light in every window and not a lock in sight.